Hello, hello. Welcome back. I hope you guys all had a beautiful week. Something really big happened for me this week. I wrapped up an era. I am officially 40 years old. Eek. I spent the last week of my 30s on a cruise with some of my favorite people. And first of all, it was amazing. It was exactly what I needed. And we probably drank too much and we definitely slept too little. And for a few days, I just let myself completely unplug. No social media, no deadlines, no constantly thinking about what needed to happen next. And what's funny is that I didn't expect one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in my business to happen because I wasn't thinking about my business. Actually, well, that's not entirely true. I had been thinking about it for months. If you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know that I'm always refining my work and I'm always asking questions like, how can I explain this more clearly? Or how can I help people create a deeper, lasting transformation? And I could feel that something really important was starting to come together, but I couldn't really see the whole picture. It was like having a puzzle with most of the pieces in place, but one really important section was still missing. And if you're anything like me, your instinct when that happens is to try harder, read another book, listen to another podcast, journal about it, think about it while you're driving and showering and while you're trying to fall asleep. We tend to believe that if we just put in a little bit more effort, the answer will finally appear. But this time it didn't. I mean, not intentionally anyway. This time I just went on vacation. I had fun and I laughed and I spent time with people that I love. I looked at the ocean and I wasn't trying to solve anything. And then today, when I sat down on my computer to work, it was like someone turned on a faucet and everything just flooded to me. Everything that had felt fuzzy suddenly became clear, and ideas that had never really connected before suddenly did. And the things I had been trying to explain for years suddenly made perfect sense. And I just sat there thinking, why does this happen? Why is it that some of our biggest breakthroughs don't happen when we're trying our hardest? Why do they seem to show up when we finally stop chasing them? And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized this isn't just about business. This is about healing and relationships and creativity. It's about purpose and manifestation. It's just about life. Because I think we've been taught that the answer to almost every problem is to just push a little harder and to think a little more, to do a little more, to consume a little more information, right? But what if some of the answers that you're looking for aren't waiting for more effort? What if they are waiting for more space? And that's what I want to explore with you today. I think that this episode is going to be one of my best ones. So make sure that you are somewhere that you can really listen. Grab some lemonade in your favorite back porch chair and let's get started. Welcome to Jotindi, Journey to the Inner Divine, a sacred space for healing energy, emotional release, and soulful transformation. If you're ready to live with joy, ease, and purpose, you're in the right place. You know what I've been thinking about ever since I got home from my cruise? Why did this happen? Like, why is it that some of the biggest ideas I've ever had show up when I wasn't actively chasing them? And I know that I'm not the only one this happens to. Have you ever had one of those moments where you were trying really hard to remember somebody's name and you're sitting there and you're thinking, what is it? I know this. But the harder you try, the further away it gets. Then, like 3 hours later, you're loading the dishwasher and suddenly it's like, oh, Susie, that was it. Right? And nobody's solved this problem. It just like appeared. Or maybe you've had a problem that you've been trying to figure out for weeks. And then when you're out walking your dog, or maybe when you're in the shower, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait, I know exactly what I need to do. I think we've all experienced that at least once, but we rarely stop and ask why. Because, if I'm being honest, usually our instincts are the opposite, right? When I don't have an answer, I assume that I probably need more information. So I read another book or I listen to another podcast or I watch a YouTube video about it. I just keep digging in deeper into this rabbit hole, right? Think about it while I'm brushing my teeth and when I'm trying to fall asleep. And if thinking about it doesn't work, obviously the solution is to think about it 100 more times, right? Spoiler alert, that's usually not it. And I realize that's kind of how we're just conditioned. We've been taught that effort is always the answer, that we need to work harder or try harder or push harder or consume more or learn more or do more. And don't get me wrong, I love learning. Obviously, right? I have a podcast. I'm constantly trying to grow and discover things. But I started wondering, is there a point where we're actually drowning out the answer by constantly looking for it? Because the thing is, the breakthrough that I had didn't come because I suddenly found one more piece of information. It came because I finally gave my mind room enough to connect everything that I'd already learned. And I think those two things are completely different things. And here's the part that's really got me thinking. I don't actually think the breakthrough happened on the cruise. I think that's giving the cruise too much credit, actually. I think it started months ago. I've been thinking about my business for years, honestly, but especially over the last several months. And I've had this feeling that something wasn't quite clicking perfectly, and not in a bad way, more like you're looking at one of those magic eye pictures and you know there's a picture in there and you might even know where to look for it, but at first everything's just a bunch of random dots, and then the more you focus on it and you do it the right way, you relax your eyes, then suddenly it focuses in just the right way and you're like, oh, it's a dolphin, right? That's kind of like what it felt like. I knew all the pieces were there, I just couldn't really see how they all fit together just right. And I kept trying to figure it out. And I'd have ideas here and there, and I'd write something down and I'd connect a couple concepts together. And secret here, I'm going to give away, I have a Google Doc that is like 75 pages long, all about my business model, because I've been trying to just nail it down because I was so close. It's like everything was on the tip of my tongue. But the whole time, it was like I was building a puzzle, but I wasn't really realizing it. And then I went on this vacation. And the thing that's funny is that, I wasn't sitting on the beach thinking about marketing strategies. And I wasn't laying by the pool making business plans. I wasn't like secretly working while I was on my vacation. I literally went on vacation. I just lived my life. The only thing I was thinking about was like, what are we doing right now? And it was beautiful. And then when I got home today, I sat down on my computer thinking, okay, starting a new episode, starting a new, like, let's get focused. Time to go back to work. Let's see what we've got here. And it was like somebody handed me that missing puzzle piece, and not even like the whole piece of the puzzle. It felt like someone turned the lights on, all these ideas that I've been collecting over the last few months. They suddenly connected and I didn't have to force it. And I wasn't sitting there squeezing my brain trying to make it happen. It was just there, which made me wonder, how many times have I done the opposite of this? Right? How many times have I been sitting there practically giving myself a headache trying to solve a problem when what I actually needed wasn't another hour of thinking? It was some space. And I wonder if you maybe have experienced this too. Maybe you've been trying to make a decision or trying to figure out whether you need to leave a relationship or whether or not you need to change careers. Or maybe you're just on your healing journey and you're just thinking, what am I missing? Why can't I figure this out? So you grab another self help book, or you listen to another podcast, or you ask 5 different friends for advice. And before long, you've got so many opinions floating around in your head that you can't even hear your own anymore. I mean, I've definitely done that. And don't get me wrong, I love learning. Like I said, I don't think the answer is to stop learning. I think learning is incredibly important. But I also think that there's a point where we have to stop collecting information long enough to let it become wisdom. Because information and wisdom are different. Information is something that we gather, and wisdom is something that we integrate, something that comes from a sense of knowing, right? And I don't know, I just don't think we talk about that enough. So after this happened, I got curious because I was thinking, this just can't be me, right? Like this has happened too many times. I've heard so many people say that they've had their best ideas in the shower or while they're mowing the lawn or whatever. And it's almost like our best ideas have terrible timing, right? So I started looking into it, and it turns out that there's actually a reason that this happens. Our brains have different ways of thinking. Sometimes you're in what we could call like a focused mode, right? And that is where we are intentionally trying to solve the problem. We're analyzing, we're planning, we're researching, you're making your lists, connecting the dots. And this mode is incredibly important. It's how we learn and make progress and how we get things done. But there's this other mode, and this one is really fascinating. It's the mode that kicks in when your mind isn't laser focused on solving something anymore. Maybe you're on a walk, or you're folding your laundry, or you're floating somewhere randomly in the ocean, or you're driving home from work. Your conscious mind loosens its grip for a minute, and your brain starts making connections in the background. Because, if you think about it, it's like your mind saying, okay, thank you for gathering all these puzzle pieces. I've got this from here. And then that's kind of what happened for me. The cruise didn't give me the answer. The answer had been forming for months. Every podcast that I recorded, and every coaching session, and every book and conversation that I had, I was collecting puzzle pieces. So this breakthrough wasn't magic, it was integration. And I don't know about you, but I think that's actually really comforting, because sometimes we think that if we don't have the answer today, that we're failing, like nothing is happening. But maybe something is happening. Maybe your mind and your body and your tuition, or your connection to God or the universe, is putting the pieces together. And just because you can't see it yet doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Actually, some of the most important work might be happening underneath the surface where you can't see it at all. It's like planting a seed. If you planted a flower in your garden, you wouldn't go outside tomorrow morning and dig it up and say, "Hello, are you growing yet? What's going on?" Right? That would be ridiculous. You trust that something is happening underground before you ever see it above the surface. So, why do we assume that if we can't see progress, nothing is happening? Maybe growth is quieter than we give it credit for. So then I started asking myself this other question. If our minds, and honestly, I think our souls too, need this space to connect the dots, why do we make it so hard for ourselves? I started paying attention to my own day, and it's kind of wild when you really look at it, because every spiritual guru is not going to want to admit this, but when I wake up, the first thing I do usually is grab my phone. I know we're not supposed to do that. I'll probably give you advice at some point during this podcast saying don't do that. But it's what happens. And then I listen to a podcast on my way to work, and then I've got people talking to me all day. And then maybe I listen to music on the way home, or maybe another podcast while I'm making dinner. And then I scroll on Instagram or watch YouTube or watch TV before going to bed, right? And none of those things are necessarily bad. I love podcasts, obviously, right? I hope you do too, because you're listening to one right now. And I love learning and doing all these things, but I started realizing, when am I giving myself a chance to hear me, not the latest expert and not the latest viral video from my favorite creator or a self-help book, but me, my own inner wisdom. Because I think a lot of us have gotten really good at consuming wisdom, but we're not really good at listening to our own. And it's not because we don't have any. I actually think that every single one of us has an incredible amount of inner wisdom. The problem isn't that it's not speaking. The problem is that our lives have become so loud that we can't hear it. And I don't just mean actual noise, I mean like mental noise, right? The constant pressure to figure everything out, and this endless stream of advice and comparison and opinions and notifications, right? It's like we're standing in the middle of Times Square trying to hear someone whisper our name. And of course, that's hard. There's so much happening. And I wonder how many times we've missed it, not because they weren't there, but because there was never any quiet for them to land. And that's really stuck with me, because I realized that my breakthrough didn't happen because I found another piece of information. It happened because for just a little while, I stopped drowning out what was already inside me. And I know that some of you are listening and probably thinking, well, that sounds great, Mariah, but I can't just go on a cruise every time I need clarity. And trust me, neither can I. And honestly, I don't think the cruise was the important part, okay? It was the space. And maybe that's the part that we've forgotten. We don't always need a week-long vacation. Sometimes we just need like 10 minutes. There's 10 minutes where nobody's asking anything from us. 10 minutes where we're trying not to learn something or fix ourselves or optimize our lives. Just 10 quiet minutes. And I know that almost sounds too simple because we live in this culture that tells us every second has to be productive. If you're walking, you should be listening to a podcast. Or if you're driving, you should be on a phone call. If you're folding laundry, play a YouTube video or watch a documentary or whatever. And we're so uncomfortable with this empty space that we immediately try to fill it. And I've definitely been guilty of that too. I'll catch myself reaching for my phone before I even realize that I'm bored. It's automatic at this point. But lately, I'm wondering, what if boredom isn't actually the enemy? What if boredom is just the doorway? What if those quiet moments that we've been trying so hard to fill are actually where some of our deepest wisdom has been waiting for us? I don't think we need to escape our lives to find clarity. I think we just need to create little pockets where clarity has a room to live. And maybe that's just sitting on your porch with your morning coffee before you check your phone. Or maybe it's taking your dog for a walk without headphones. Or folding the laundry without trying to multitask. And not because any of those things are magical, but because you're finally giving yourself permission to hear your own thoughts and to notice your own feelings and to let your nervous system just take a breath, and remind yourself that your mind doesn't have to be on every second of every day. And I think honestly, this is becoming harder and harder for us because we've gotten so used to looking outside of ourselves for answers. We have access to more information than any generation before us. And if I have a question, I just Google it. And if I want to learn how to do something, there's a YouTube video for that. I can ask ChatGPT now. I can read 10 different opinions in 5 minutes. And don't get me wrong, that is incredible. And I'm grateful for it. But the question I'm sitting with now is, at what point do we stop gathering information long enough to ask ourselves what we think? When do we stop searching long enough to listen or stop consuming long enough to integrate? And I have this feeling that the next answer you're looking for might not be in another book or another podcast. Don't tell Mariah I said that. Or another course, it might already be inside you. And I think that's what happened to me anyway, that the answer wasn't created on the cruise, it was uncovered. And it had been growing quietly inside me all along, and it finally just found its way out. So, why does this happen? I think that's a question, right? Like, why do our best ideas show up in the shower or halfway through our walk? Or the second we stop obsessing over the thing that we've been obsessing over for 3 weeks? Well, from what I've been reading, our brains are actually have different ways of working. Like I mentioned earlier, we have this focus mode when we're analyzing and planning and researching, and it's incredibly useful. And you couldn't build a business without it. But the interesting part is that your brain can't stay in that mode forever. At some point, it needs room to wander. And when it does, it starts connecting things in the background. Like your subconscious has been paying attention to every little thing this whole time. And it's quietly been filing things away and making connections that you didn't even realize were there. And you're so busy thinking, I don't have the answer, but your brain is going, hold on, I'm working on it in the background. Like there's this incredibly intelligent part of us that's always working behind the scenes. And for me, that's where the science and the spirituality start to overlap because science might call your subconscious making new connections. And spiritually, you might call it intuition or guidance or the universe or God. And honestly, I don't think the label matters all that much. I think what matters is that we've all experienced it. And we've all had those moments where the answer seems to just come out of nowhere, except maybe it wasn't nowhere. Maybe it was from somewhere much deeper than our constant thinking mind. And the thing I find really interesting is that none of that could happen if we're constantly interrupting this process. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone who keeps getting interrupted every 10 seconds. Eventually, you just give up. I know I've had that experience before. And I wonder if we're doing that to ourselves all the time. Like our intuition is whispering to us. And before it has a chance to finish the sentence, we've picked up our phone or we've turned on the TV and started scrolling or convinced ourselves that we must need more information before we can trust what we're already sensing. So, if that's true, if our minds really do need space to connect the dots, if our intuition is easier to hear when there's a little bit less noise, then that raises a very interesting question. When do we ever give ourselves that space? I mean, really think about it for a second. How often are you completely alone with your thoughts, with no podcast, no music, no TV in the background, nobody else's opinions or notifications, just you? And if I had to ask myself that question, the answer is almost never. And that is even with me consciously trying to create space in my life. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that we've all become so used to filling every quiet moment that silence actually starts to feel extremely uncomfortable. And the second that we're standing in a line, we pull out our phones. Or when we start doing some mundane task around the house, we need entertainment to go along with it. And we've become really uncomfortable with this empty space. And I get it. I'm not judging anybody. I'm describing myself too here. But I keep wondering, what if those little pockets of silence aren't empty? What if they're actually where some of our greatest clarity lives? What if we've been treating them like wasted time when they're actually some of the most valuable moments of our day? So now I've made this renewed little promise to myself, and it's not any huge life changing commitment. It's just, a tiny experiment. I'm going to try to start leaving a little more room in my day. Not because I think every quiet moment is going to come with some massive life revelation. Honestly, they probably won't. Sometimes I'll just be sitting there and thinking about what I want for dinner. And you know what? That's okay. The point isn't to force an insight, which now that I say that out loud, it's kind of funny, isn't it? Imagine trying to force spaciousness. I'm going to relax as hard as I can, right? That doesn't really work. Instead, I'm just trying to create opportunities, little invitations. Maybe I leave my phone inside when I take the dog out. Or maybe I drive somewhere without immediately reaching for a podcast or turning on the music. And none of these things are revolutionary, but I think that they're creating something that's been missing, which is this pause, a breath, a little bit of a margin. And I think this margin is something that we don't have enough of anymore because we schedule our calendars so tightly and we fill our minds so completely and pack every spare minute with something that we've accidentally left no room for ourselves, no room to notice, to reflect, to hear that little nudge that says, hey, maybe this is the direction, or maybe that's not yours to carry anymore. You can set that down, or you already know the answer. And I wonder how many times our intuition has whispered and we've just missed it because Spotify started playing in the next episode, or because we picked up our phone, or because we immediately asked someone else what they thought before asking ourselves. I've spent years listening to everyone, to teachers and books and experts and mentors, and I'm grateful for every one of them. But somewhere along the way, I also had to relearn how to listen to myself and not my fears or my overthinking, and definitely not that inner critic that loves to narrate every possible worst case scenario, but the quieter voice, the steady one, the one that doesn't usually yell, the one that's patient enough to wait until everything else gets quiet. I think that's the voice that I'd like to hear a little more often. And this week, I don't want to challenge you to do more. I actually want to challenge you to leave a little space, just a little. Maybe it's only 5 minutes, maybe a walk or a drive without music. Maybe instead of asking, why haven't I figured this out yet? You can ask, what if the answer is already on its way? So if you are listening to this and you're thinking, okay, I love this idea, but how do I actually make space? I want to encourage you to keep it very simple. This isn't about adding another thing to your to do list. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's about taking something that you're already doing and removing the distraction. Next time you're outside, listen and see if you can hear birds, or notice if there's a breeze, or pay attention to what's happening around you. If you enjoy gardening, maybe you could spend a little time outside with your hands in the dirt. Or you can take a bath without bringing your phone into the bathroom. Yeek, right? That's a big challenge. Maybe you could cook a meal without trying to multitask. And none of these things are about doing nothing. They're just about doing one thing, giving your mind just enough to occupy itself while leaving enough room for those deeper connections to happen naturally. Because I really believe that our minds, and honestly our souls, we need that space. And here's the important part: don't sit down expecting a profound revelation. Don't think, okay, universe, I'm listening. Tell me my purpose. Just create the space. That's it. And maybe nothing happens that day. And maybe nothing happens the whole week. Or maybe somewhere between watering your flowers and watching the birds at the feeder, you'll suddenly find yourself thinking, oh, that's it. That's what I've been trying to figure out. And when that happens, don't dismiss it. Write it down. Follow it. Trust it. Because sometimes our deepest wisdom, it doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it slips in so quietly that if we aren't paying attention, we might miss it. So, as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Maybe the answer that you're looking for isn't as far away as it feels. Maybe it isn't hiding in the next book or the next piece of advice. Maybe it's already beginning to take shape inside you. It might just need a little bit of space. So, this week, instead of asking yourself, what else do I need to do? Ask yourself, where can I create a little more room? And if you're looking for more guidance about this, I would love to invite you to download my free clarity map. It's a self guided workbook that walks you through simple exercises to help you uncover clarity in whatever area of your life feels uncertain right now, whether that's your relationship or your healing journey or your purpose, or just that feeling that something needs to change, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Sometimes all we need is the right question at the right time. And if you'd like to take this even deeper, you can always book a free 30-minute clarity call with me. We'll talk about where you are and what's been keeping you stuck and how I might be able to support you in a way that's personalized to you and your journey. And there's no pressure, it's just a conversation. I'll have links to both in the show notes. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Whether you've been here since episode 1 or you just found this podcast recently, I am so grateful that you're here. Getting to share this journey with you each week has been one of my greatest gifts, and I truly can't wait to see where this next year takes us. So until next time, leave a little space for magic. And who knows, the answer you've been searching for might already be on its way. Remember, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path.